So my name is Jacqueline. I went to Michigan State. That's how I know Hardy. So I did my bachelor's in biochemistry and molecular biology. I'm originally from Kenya. Right now, I just started my PhD in summer last year, so I just went through the whole rotations and choosing advisors, and currently I'm taking classes and trying to figure out what my research will be. So I'm in a lab that does cancer, breast cancer research and drug discovery. So probably looking for something to do within that type of research. However, after my PhD, I'm hoping to go into like industry, like pharmaceutical or biotech companies, or something completely different like administration or scientific journalism. So hence the YouTube thing.
Gotcha.
So yeah, that's in a nutshell about me. So who is Emily?
Sure. So I'm Emily Kearney. I did my undergrad in biology, specifically ecology and evolutionary biology. And I got into research and, like actually pushing the scientific field forward there. I was an undergrad intern in a lab where we were really focusing on studying monarch butterflies and how they had evolved defensive systems against predators using the milkweed plant and its toxins that it produces. And I was also looking at a number of other different species and their interactions with insects and how those insects either built defenses against the plant toxins or use those plant toxins as defenses against their own predators. So when I finished my undergrad, I realized that I wanted to continue to do that. And so I decided to do grad school, focusing on ecology. But one of the things that I really wanted to move towards was doing something that was more applied. And so for my PhD, instead of focusing on these very like natural systems, no human in the loop systems, I started to focus on agriculture. And so actually for my PhD, which I did at UC Berkeley with Dr. Claire Kremen, I focused on pollination in agricultural landscapes that were and those services being provided by native species. And one of the things that I realized was just that wasn't quite applied enough for me. I didn't want the end result of my scientific process to be publishing papers for other scientists. I wanted it to be like actual usable recommendations that I could give to the farmers. If agriculture was going to be the field that I continued working in. And so as I was finishing up my PhD, I started to explore different avenues. And so just like you, I had a number of different ones in mind. I actually I'm still interested, but at the time I was very interested in science policy. And so I was looking at fellowships like the one held by the California Council on Science and Technology, where they put you with a committee in the California legislature for a year, and you are the scientific advisor that actually gives them more information about the scientific studies that they're using to inform the bills that they make, as well as the AAAS fellowship, which I think is more nationally known. But the other path that I was looking at was going into data science. And one of the reasons why I was really interested in that is because it would put me in a very quick loop with the stakeholders. So as a data scientist, you are actually either trying to produce results for clients of the company that you work for, or the internal teams of that company. And so you actually have to be very in touch with the stakeholders who are going to be using the results of your analysis. And that was something that really interested me. So I applied for a fellowship called the Insight Data Science Fellowship, and actually got it. And so spent a very intense 7 weeks of my life kind of retraining to take all of the analysis and data wrangling skills that I had used in my PhD and be able to apply them into a more tech conscious or industry focused way. So, I guess I should tell you what I'm doing right now. So right now I'm actually, I left Insight Data Science. I actually was hired there as a program director to help other PhDs through that transition. And so I've seen actually PhDs from basically every different field, and some master's students as well, transition from the scientific work that they were doing in, with quantitative research into data science, because I was doing that for a little bit over a year. And now I'm just about to start a new position with a company that does hiring analytics and trying to de-bias the hiring process. So that's where I am right now.
It's also really interesting. It's really like starting off from like agriculture and then using the transition all the way through grad school and now doing something I feel like really different, but using the same technical skills that you got through all that. That is quite interesting. And you mentioned monarchs, and I had a flashback to my first job as an undergrad. I worked as a lab tech in organismal biology lab, and we were like tagging monarchs and sending them off to during their migration, and then to look at which ones came back the next season. And I was like really flashback to those days.
Yeah, they're a very charismatic insect. They're probably one of the most charismatic insects possible.
And very beautiful. So.
Yes, well deserving of that. Yeah.
So I'm just curious, what does your day-to-day look like?
As a data scientist, you are basically glued to your computer, and that became even more so the truth during the pandemic. So actually, as a program director, one of the reasons why I really enjoyed the job is that in person, I actually wasn't on my laptop as much as if I was like a full-time data scientist at a company. So so I'll kind of give you like the brief description. So as a program director, I did a lot of one-on-one work with fellows, as well as like leading workshops in order to help them understand what skills they were bringing to the table and how to utilize them as data scientists. And so that actually kept me off of my computer for about half of my day. And then the other half would be, helping to review code, like looking at their analyses, and actually kind of working through the more data science parts of it. So as a data scientist, the day-to-day normally looks like about 70% of your time on your computer working as an individual contributor. So what that means in industry is that you have a project that you're working on, and you may have other people helping you on that project, but you're pushing that project forward, right? You're not managing other people to do this work. You are the one doing the work. And so that 70% of your time, a lot of people really enjoy it because it really is kind of that creative space. You're given data, you're given kind of this big end goal, and you get to figure out, how do I map the path from taking that data to that end goal, and you're trusted as that kind of scientific expert to do that. And then the other 30% of your time will be spent in collaborative meetings with your team. And so this usually includes daily or weekly stand-ups, is what they're called in the industry, but these are check-in points, somewhere between 30 minutes to an hour, and you actually give a quick update of where you are on the projects that you're working on. Everybody else does, and it's a great time to ask questions or get feedback, or even set up another further meeting with someone to help you get through a pain point that you're facing. And then the rest of that 30% is usually in meetings with your direct manager, talking about your professional development, as well as like the successes and potential failures that you've had over the past week, month, depending on kind of what that cycle looks like, as well as larger meetings where you might be getting clued in, or even contributing to the overall idea of like where the company or where your team is going. So I think like being a data scientist is, if you enjoy data analysis, if you really enjoy the hard problems of taking raw data and being able to transform it and put it into analysis to find results, like that's the bread and butter of what a data scientist does. And that's what, like if you enjoy that part, then you'll probably enjoy being a data scientist in industry. As an individual contributor, and this is really where where the balance of meaning switches, like as an individual contributor, most of your time is going to be spent coding, you working independently, probably on your computer, but I would imagine you could have an individual contributor as a clinical researcher too, in which case it might be more bench work or other things. But versus a manager or a team, somebody who is helping the team to run better. And so actually what I found was, even though I really enjoyed the data analysis in my PhD, once I got into a situation where the team around me was all focused on the same goal, I started to enjoy teamwork and making the teamwork better more than I thought I would have. And so actually in my new position, I'm going to be half data scientist, half project manager, because one of my goals will be to make sure that everybody on our data science team is working well with the engineering team and our product team to meet deadlines and to basically give those, overcome those challenges as necessary, and not necessarily get too bogged down in the theoretical stuff that as scientists we can start to get a little, we start to daydream a bit.
Yeah. I understand that completely. Now that you mentioned all these skills that you have gathered over the years, you give us like a breakdown of how you got those coding skills, those technical skills that you use. Did you get them, did you take classes in undergrad, or is it something that you learned along the way in your PhD, or did you take a class after your PhD in your fellowship, or how did it come about?
Yeah, so a lot of the technical skills that I drew on during the fellowship were skills that I learned during my PhD, more or less independently. So the coding that I was doing is also sometimes called scripting, depending on how much of a computer scientist you're talking to or not. Just FYI, I like to throw out different terms, especially like industry terms, because I feel like one of the issues that PhDs have when they try and transition into industry is just not knowing the vocabulary, and so not necessarily knowing how to talk about their skills to someone. So that's one of the reasons why I do it. But I coded in R for all of my data wrangling as well as analyses, and so that gave me, and I did take classes in R and on statistics that helped give me a base of understanding of what, how should I treat data, what types of models are there out there to use, that type of stuff. But the technical skills that were really useful during the fellowship and after as a data scientist were ones that I learned kind of independently. And that's because a lot of the stuff that you'll be doing as a data scientist is actually independent problem solving. So going back to kind of that, they give you a data set, they give you an end goal, and you have to map this path. In a class, when you're given data and an end goal, usually the path is somewhat mapped for you. When you get data from your PhD and you have your end goal of a model in mind, you have to map that path for yourself. And it's really that independent work that is what you need to practice. And so I'd say, if you're interested in becoming a data scientist, but you don't feel like you're getting kind of that independent analysis from your PhD, there's a lot of data sets out there online. And so start to explore with those and come up with your own problem to solve with those, because it really is that independent path making that is so effective. And also, when you're making that your own path, you will come across problems in transforming your data or applying a model that you never would have imagined in a class, and then you have to go into the bowels of the internet and be like, okay, Stack Exchange, tell me how to fix this. Like, what do I do? And it is that stuff that actually makes you a better coder and a better statistician sometimes, right? It's those weird idiosyncrasies that you have in your data that help to build that intuition, that data intuition that you need.
I completely relate to that because I've spent hours on Stackful and GitHub trying to get my code to work or figure out how to deal with my data.
And I think that as during my PhD, I was so frustrated with those hours of time, right? I was like, this is not moving me forward. I can't figure this out. This is terrible. And then when I got into industry, I realized oh, this right here, knowing the right way to find the solution to a problem is exactly what they're paying you for, because you've spent hours training that skill, and now you can, and everybody has those issues, and most people can't solve it the way that PhDs can.
Talking about the technical skills, but what other skills that did you develop along the way, throughout grad school, that are really helping you right now in your day-to-day work?
Yeah, so a lot of the skills that I think went kind of unnoticed, or I felt as if were superfluous to my PhD, are some of the ones that I use most now, and those are my scientific communication skills. So I was really passionate about doing outreach to school kids, as well as at science nights, and to the farmers that I was working with, and that those scientific communication skills are actually what makes it so easy for me to talk to people in industry about the data and about how I'm going to use it or how I'm going to help them with it, right? And so I would say that while science communication is usually focused on in classes for writing better papers, it really is that outreach that helps you develop a language where you can talk to anyone about the science that you're doing or about the analysis that you're doing. And that's if you do want to transition into industry, you will have to talk to people who do not have, who even if they have a PhD, they probably don't have a PhD in your field or in the type of project that you're working on right there. And so you will have to talk in language that, and adjust the language that you use depending on their responses back to you. And so developing that skill is going to be really important.
Even right now when I'm starting off, each and every class is okay, you need to speak up, you need to get started on talking so that we can develop that over the next few years. And I understand, when it comes to giving scientific talks to the lay audience, especially, sometimes there's a lot of miscommunication that happens, and we see this in news and all, and it's encouraging to know that that skill transfers over even into industry. You touched on some of the things that you really enjoy about your work, and that is the mapping your own way into getting the solutions, into getting to that end goal. What are the other things that you do enjoy in your day-to-day life, or in even in terms of hours, work hours and life hours?
I really found a home as a data scientist. So I would say there's 99% of things I enjoy, and maybe there's 1% of things that I mildly dislike. Kind of going from a life perspective, being a data scientist, this might sound shallow, but it pays really well and it has really good benefits. And so if you're looking for a career that is going to set you off on a financially stable path, it is a great career to pursue. And even during the pandemic, and potentially because of the pandemic, companies are still hiring for data scientists. We haven't seen the demand drop. And so I think it's a career that is stable through a lot of different economic transitions because companies, and these might be like some of the older companies that we don't necessarily associate with tech, like Macy's, but they understand the value of knowing what's going on in their own data and how and what even the small amounts of data they can get from the couple of months when the lockdowns first started, like how is that going to determine the rest of their time working within the pandemic, right? So there's so I'd say economically stable, lots of great benefits, and then you get to set like your 9 to 5 hours. I think that for tech culture, some startups sometimes get the bad rap of not having limitations on time, but I've actually never really met a team that didn't want people to say no, like I need to work within these hours, or this is my limit. And also encouraging people to take vacation and take time to rejuvenate, because they're investing in you as someone to continue to give them good work, week over week, month over month, year over year. And then I think the other thing that I've really enjoyed is the fact that I feel very aligned with my team. So even if we're working on different projects or have slightly different interests, it's unlike in my PhD lab where all of the PhD students were working on different projects and had different end goals, right? Like we were writing different papers in order to get our PhDs. In an industry setting, you really are trying to work towards the same end goal as the rest of your teammates. And so I felt like that just opens a lot of collaboration doors and a lot of support that I didn't necessarily get as much or in the same way during my PhD.
I'm curious about the 1% that you do not like about being a data scientist.
Yeah, I think the 1% is more kind of nostalgia. In an academic field, you get to ask the questions that you want to ask, and so I think that sometimes when you don't necessarily feel 100% aligned with the team vision, it can feel slightly disappointing because you're like, oh yeah, there was this world in which I got to do basically whatever I wanted and whatever I found most interesting was what I focused on. And I think that, I think that there's some nostalgia, some melancholy for that independence, but at the same time, I'm a person who always I love teamwork. And so when I do feel that way, it kind of is washed out by the fact that I'm like, yeah, but I get to work on a team that I really, really love, and so even if the thing that we're working towards isn't the thing that I find most interesting, the fact that I get to work every day with people that I really enjoy is well worth it. Yeah.
I want to take you back a little bit to your first year in PhD, and starting from first year, reflect on your growth until graduation. And did any of your interests starting out change in the course of your PhD? Did any of your perspectives change in the course of your PhD? Was data science in the back of your mind starting from the start, or is that something that developed as you went along?
That's a great question. So so data science was not in my mind when I started my PhD. I didn't even know it was a field that you could go into. It was not on my radar. And when I started my PhD, I was very, very excited about pushing the scientific field forward. And so I'd say I did have there was 95% of me knew that I was going to be a professor, and 5% was like, maybe there's another path that could also fulfill my interests. But that switched. And I think that the thing that when I look back on my growth as a PhD is the fact that it happened in starts and stops. I think that was something that while I was doing my PhD, I was very frustrated with. Like there were semesters or summers where I felt like I wasn't really leveling up my skills, or I was floundering with how to set up the scientific question and be able to like collect the right data to answer it, right? And I think those times where I felt like I wasn't making progress they were just like, they're really hard, but in the end, when I look back on my PhD, it was actually those starts and stops. Like those stops were times when I was focusing on other stuff, and I just didn't value that stuff quite as much as I was valuing, like working on a chapter of my dissertation. But now, like, I wouldn't have given that time up because it built other skills that I use every day. So some of those things would be like, oh, I got really interested in governance of and like being a representative for my department at the graduate assembly, and it was something that I like devoted a ton of time to and didn't feel like it was necessarily making a ton of change, but I was helping to keep my department informed. And those skills of communication and being able to distill a lot of kind of legalese language down into the things that somebody might care about is actually stuff that I still use today. So I think that your PhD is going to be filled with tangents, and you just don't know what the value of those tangents are until you have finished the PhD. And it's okay to be on tangents. Like even if they feel frustrating, even if you feel like this isn't making progress towards the end goal. I do know some people who like sped through their PhD and are very happy afterwards. That's just not what my path looked like. And so for everybody who is going to do a 6-year PhD and have a relatively long and windy path, totally okay. You will come out on the other side.
True. What? Those moments where you're like, what did I get myself into? But it's encouraging to know that there's some light at the end of the tunnel. And I mean that I think most some of the people that I've talked to, they're always it's okay to feel that way. It's normal. Just have a cup of coffee, green tea, go to the gym, and then get back up the next morning and go back to work. And
I guess I want to broaden that out. For me, I like these cycles were definitely on the scale of months to semesters. And so, and I think that one of the things that I really wish I had had during my PhD, I guess, was somebody to talk to about the like abject failures that happened. So during my first field season, I realized that I had no idea how to actually collect the data that I needed to collect because everything in the field was keeping me. I was working in Ecuador in a tropical rainforest area, and I needed to tag flowers. And I thought, oh, I'll just use paint or thread like everybody else has. Well, it turns out paint kills the flowers, and thread is chopped off by ants that run up and down these trees all the time. And I had and then there was also a need to like cover flowers so they wouldn't be pollinated by anything else. But the issue is that anything I covered them with got too wet or wouldn't stay on the trunk. And so I left this field season basically having no data, no idea how I was going to collect any more data, and the knowledge that half of my PhD, which was going to focus on these wild relatives of chocolate trees, which is what my main dissertation focused on, I couldn't collect any data from them because they were on steep slopes and the flowers were 30 feet in the air. And unless I could build scaffolding around the trees, I was not going to be able to do anything with it. And it took me a year and a half to go back and do another field season. And I felt so guilty that it took me that long to go again. And now I realize, oh, it took me that long because I had just gone through a terrible 2-month span where everything that I thought I was going to be able to do is not going to happen. And I needed that time to actually figure out and be prepared for the next time. So it's okay if it lasts more than an evening or a weekend or whatnot.
If you could advise your PhD self, what are some of the things that you did and you're like, oh, maybe not do that, or a different approach to something that happened in your PhD?
So I think I have 2 things. So one of them is take care of your mental health. I didn't start seeing a therapist for talk therapy until my 3rd or 4th year, and I would have really benefited from doing that. And I think that's just because you deal with so much failure, and you deal with a lot of everybody around you has their own agenda in order. Academia is so independent that there's a lot of skills that you need to build and boundaries that you need to build in order to say yes, I can do this for you, but you also have to give me something in return. And for me, the place where I found how to build those boundaries and ask for help was in therapy. So maybe you don't need therapy, but definitely find people who help you to build those boundaries and build those language skills to ask for the help that you do need. And if somebody tells you that you can't expect that help, or that you shouldn't expect that help, or you shouldn't expect to be able to keep that boundary, they don't know what they're talking about. You should be doing your PhD the way that you need, to do your PhD, And then the second one is about field seasons. So I don't know how this translates into, bench work in a lab, but for me, field seasons was where I collected my data, and they always proved to be incredibly challenging, partly because I was out of the country and away for months at a time. But even for my friends who were doing field work on the weekends, you were off campus. It is a different situation. And so I would say just make sure that you are as prepared as possible, and that you build a field team that you feel very confident in and very trustworthy in. Because my field seasons, one of the things that I learned from my first field season was to come back with field assistants, and to do it as a team effort, so that I didn't have to think about the problems all by myself. So building that team and investing in that team as much as possible is really helpful.
And I am definitely leaving this interview with a lot of pointers to be okay, yeah, it's fine. It's a season, it's a period of doing this, and then I'll be but thank you so much for agreeing to talk with me and share some insights on your PhD and life as a data scientist. Right now I'm considering all my options, and I have really no idea what I want to do with my PhD, and having some insights into some professions, it really does help pave some way. Things change, I understand that, but having some idea of where I'm headed. So thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Yeah, I've really enjoyed talking with you as well. And if you have any more questions for me, feel free to reach out. And keep those doors open, right? Even if they're just, the what ifs in the back of your head.